business. Let's go to the Farm Bureau guest line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team at Mississippi Farm Bureau. We are 135 days from opening day of the college baseball season. Kendall Rogers joins us from D1Baseball.com. Kendall, good to see you. Odd time of the year, I know, but always good to catch up.
Yeah, it's great to hear from you. I was asking your producer earlier if Juice Kiffin or something had a meeting come up and the dog couldn't join you on the radio, so he just called me.
No, he'll be with us later today.
Okay.
But no, we were talking earlier this week. You guys at D1 Baseball put together the list of top 100 programs in the country. And if we're being completely honest, people in Mississippi didn't really engage when you were counting down from 100 down to about 11, but expected that both Mississippi State and Ole Miss would be in the top 10 of the countdown. And then when your final top 10 came out, there was obviously some debate and some curiosity. So big picture, before we kind of drill into the top 10, what went into this? What are the determining factors for how you rank programs?
I think the biggest thing from our perspective, Richard, is you look at the last 5 years as kind of our measuring stick, because I mean, if you start to go out too far, you're kind of like you're in many cases you're taking like programs who had totally different coaches back then, totally different situations and things like that. So we go the last 5 years, and what we kind of look at is what is the program's recruiting like? What are their facilities like? What is the trajectory? For me, that's a big one for me, is like, what have you done for me lately? But also, like, how do things look for the future of your program? So for me and like for the rest of our staff, that's kind of how we did things. We looked at College World Series appearances, super regional appearances, and the other thing for me, and I think this is a differentiator. I know it's a little different than like Fit and a few others on this, is I kind of dive into the actual schedules a little bit. Like I, for instance, you look at Arkansas 2 years ago or Tennessee this past year, and I don't necessarily look at it as, if they don't get to Omaha, they're automatically behind someone. I saw somebody, earlier arguing with me about, Mississippi State being behind Arkansas because Arkansas didn't have a national championship. But I mean, at the end of the day, Arkansas was a team that was an out away from a national championship and was the best team in college baseball for 13 weeks 2 years ago. So I actually kind of dug into those teams a little bit more and said, you know what, I'm just, for at least one part of this exercise, I'm going to actually ignore what happened in Omaha and just kind of see how things unfold as the season progressed.
All right, so let's start with 10 down through 6. Stanford at 10, okay. Texas Tech at 9, Ole Miss coming off the national championship at 8, LSU at 7, Louisville at 6. So my guess is that there are Ole Miss fans that would look at that and go, well, hold on a second. Yeah, LSU traditionally, but using your last 5 years barometer, probably wouldn't make sense to be in front of Ole Miss. And then kind of the same thing with Louisville, who's taken a little bit of a step back from where they were at the beginning of Dan McDonald's tenure there. Why is Ole Miss at 7, and why are those two programs specifically in front of them?
Yeah, I think when you look at Louisville, I mean, they had 1 year they didn't make the NCAA tournament. They were a bubble team. But this is still a program that's, made the College World Series, 2 to 3 times over the last 5 years. Like, they've been ultra consistent. And I think, they made a super regional this year. They played A&M on the road. They're going to be a really good team next year, probably a top 10 team once again. So when I look at Louisville, they were one of the, top teams, or a top 5 team in our last rankings. They dropped down a couple of spots because of the bad year they had last year. But what it tells me a lot about a program whenever they have a year like that and they turn around and go, oh, well, we're just going to make another super regional. And, oh, by the way, we're going to be really good again next year. So I think for Louisville, had they had a year like this year where they just barely made a regional, they kind of stumbled in a little bit. I think for me, I would have definitely had them behind Ole Miss. But because they rebounded, I think that shows to me that, like, that season was more of an aberration than it was a potential trend-starting, year. I think for LSU, LSU is the one team that you can definitely make a legit argument about. But again, they were a team that we had number 4 previously. They dropped down 3 spots. And I think even with LSU dropping down 3 spots, I think this is a program that I don't think anybody in the world would argue about their trajectory. I mean, they brought in the top transfer class in college baseball. They brought in an elite high school class. It's clearly, elite across the board, everything, facilities, recruiting, blah, blah, blah. And so, I mean, LSU is a tough one to argue against, I think, right now. If the trajectory wasn't very good, then I think you could go, you know what, LSU definitely should be behind them. But I think we would all agree that LSU is going to be really good moving forward.
Top 5, Oregon State at 5, Florida at 4, which I got a little bit of an issue with. Mississippi State at 3.
You need to come after me about 4. I mean, Florida, I'll be very honest. I'm an honest person. I'm an open book. And Florida, frankly, guys, is the team that when I kind of went back and dove into some of these clubs, two things stood out to me. One, I think we had Tennessee a little too low. I was kind of outvoted on that. I wanted Tennessee in about the 11, 12 spot. I love the direction this program's going. I love what they've done the last couple of years. But Florida is the team for me that I think is just kind of riding off that 2017. Because remember, we don't count the COVID year. So they won the championship in 2017. They've got great facilities. They've got probably the best recruiting base in college baseball. But for me, I was a little iffy on that one at 4. I'll be very honest with you.
I feel like Florida's trending in the wrong direction.
Remember, they were number 1 last time, and they're number 4 now. But I would argue they probably should be a little bit lower. But I will say this. This is a huge, huge year for them because they should be excellent. They added Hurston Waldrop out of the portal. They've got all of those guys back outside of Barco on the mound. They've got everybody back offensively outside of Judd Fabian. They should be really good next year. If they're not, they're one of those programs that in 2 years, when we do this exercise again, they will absolutely drop like a rock. But there's no doubt. They've been wobbly. They've been really wobbly.
Mississippi State at number 3, Arkansas at 2, and Vanderbilt at 1. And Haydad may want to jump in on this in just a second. The only thing that I would say about Mississippi State at number 3 behind Arkansas is that I heard for a really long time that the only thing missing for Mississippi State was that national championship. Mm-hmm. They had the Omaha appearances. They have the fan base. They've got the best stadium in the country, all of those things. And they checked that off the list, right? So they've got the national title now, and Arkansas's missing that. Arkansas's got the stadium. They got the fan base. They've got the consistency, all of those same things. And I know you said you were making it not just about Omaha, but at some point that feels like that should be a little bit of a tiebreaker.
Well, I mean, I would also argue the team finishing dead last in the SEC is a tiebreaker.
They were bad last year.
Think about Arkansas. Exactly. So when I look at Arkansas, Mississippi State, not necessarily this is a determining factor. Number one, I think when you look at Arkansas over the last 5 years, every state fan imaginable would say Arkansas's had their number. Arkansas's record against Mississippi State over the last 5 years is 12-5. They finished ahead of Mississippi State 4 out of the last 5 years in the SEC. The 5th year, by the way, was a year in which they tied. So they've been better. They were better than Mississippi State in the SEC for those 5 years. And I also think when you look at last year, they're finishing dead last. And I get it, by losing Landon, losing Stone, that stinks. That's terrible. But Arkansas lost Peyton Pallette. I mean, they lost a first, second-round guy, their Friday guy, before the season started. And what did they do? They got to the College World Series, and they got to the national semifinals. So it's not like Arkansas is one of those teams that last year, all of a sudden, they were just totally healthy and Mississippi State just had all this bad luck. They lost their Friday guy too. And granted, I don't think Peyton Pallette is quite Landon Sims, but still, they had a great year. So for me, I'm with you in the sense that like the national championship should be a tiebreaker in most instances. But I would also argue that when two teams that had somewhat similar setbacks, when one finishes dead last and one makes it to Omaha and is a national semifinalist, that also should matter. And so I just think when you look at Arkansas, you look at that, you look at their record against State in conference, you look at the fact they've been better than State in the standings over the last 4 of the last 5 years. On top of the fact they were one catch away from winning a national championship. They were 2 years ago the best team in college baseball, all but 1 weekend out of the year. I think all those different factors points to Arkansas being ahead of them. With that said,
Okay.
I absolutely get the argument for Mississippi State in the sense that they have a national championship, because you're right, that does matter.